Hello, I'm Dr. Darrell Carter, ETSU Assistant Professor of History. In this segment, we're going to be discussing the interwar years between 1989 and 2001. This is a very important era between the end of the Cold War and the beginning of the War on Terror and the 21st century. This era is also important as it shows economic, technological, financial, social, cultural, and political changes that continue to reverberate well into the 21st century. It is also an important era as we see the nation grow in terms of hyperpartisanship, a nation that seems at times to be coming apart at the seams, as the divisions exacerbated by technological feats such as iPhones, iPads, the internet, email, blogs, etc., have allowed Americans to separate themselves from one another, allow them to congregate in groups of like-minded individuals, allowed Americans to disassociate themselves with the larger body politic, and allowed them to hear what they want to hear, see what they want to see, listen to what they want to listen, and read what they want to read without concern for facts, without concern for the other side, without concern for differing opinions. And this begins here in 1989 as the nation watches in horror as students are brutally suppressed in China at Tiananmen Square. Students protesting for freedom were on the receiving end of a brutal crackdown by the Chinese military. In addition, Germany was reunified in 1990 as the Berlin Wall came crashing to the ground. By 1991, the Cold War was over as Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet premier, signed papers in December of that year, signaling the end of the USSR and beginning the era of the Russian Federation. As President George H.W. Bush was tending to foreign affairs, he increasingly encountered a world that was changing very quickly without much forethought or notice seemingly to his staff or others. This includes Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi dictator, who seized Kuwait in 1990 because of its riches and allegedly over the abuses that it had perpetrated on the Iraqi people, especially its women. As Bush mobilized the global community to take on the Gulf War and to win in record time, Bush also proclaimed a new world order. No one knew what these characteristics would be, what they would mean, but the Gulf War, being the first post-Cold War international crisis, was also a first step, as Bush saw it, to create a world based on democracy and global free trade. But as Bush was hailed as a hero and received some 90% approval ratings in the wake of the Gulf War, Bush also was ignoring critical fault lines on the domestic side of the presidency. This included a recession that began in 1991 in which millions of Americans were feeling the pain at the pump, the pain of not being able to pay their mortgages or rents, pain at not being able to find work, people who found their homes underwater, people who found that their children's future did not seem as bright as it had during their own early years. Bush, like many of his predecessors, considered himself a foreign policy president, allowing critical issues to be dealt with by staff members. It is not that he was unconcerned or that he was not happy with, if you will, tending to domestic politics. But like most American presidents, and especially Cold War presidents, he saw his primary focus as foreign affairs. He even displayed great zeal and great judgment in not gloating too harshly and too loudly over what happened in the Soviet Union and its brutal end, fired without a shot fired in December of 1991. He had mobilized the community, the global community, for the Gulf War. hailed for his diplomatic skills, developed over a lifetime of work in the CIA, the House of Representatives, the Nixon administration, his time in China, the vice presidency, and his service in World War II. But technological change, for example, scanners at supermarkets, seemed to confuse President Bush. Bush did not understand these things. He did not understand the cost of a price of, or a loaf of bread, or a gallon of milk. And out of this came the 1992 election, in which a man who was born in the early 1920s took on, ultimately, an old eccentric billionaire from Texas, Ross Perot, as well as a well-spoken, highly educated, successful Paul named Bill Clinton from Arkansas. Bill Clinton was a Democrat, the first serious presidential candidate born in the post-World War II era. Born in 1946 in Hope, Arkansas. Bill Clinton had gone to Georgetown University, had been a Rhodes Scholar, had graduated from Yale Law School. He had been a state attorney general and served since 1979 as governor of Arkansas, with the exception of a 2-year period between 1981 and 1983. Clinton embraced the new third way of the so-called New Democrats. These were people within the Democratic Party who followed the tenets of the Democratic Leadership Council, which was founded in 1985 following the disastrous defeat of Walter Mondale to Ronald Reagan. The third way talked about taking the best of democratic ideals. These are ideals that talk about promoting trade, promoting freedom, protecting people's rights, respecting women, minorities, and others, and use that in conjunction with the best of what they found in Republican ideals, including beating the deficit, driving down debt, helping Americans pursue jobs, pursue small businesses, pursue education, and other things without too much interference from the federal government. Bill Clinton had been a leader in this third way. He had been a leader in terms of changing the Democratic Party to a more centrist position. As he began his campaign in the fall of 1991, even he could not foresee some of the things that were coming down the road, including the culture wars, which we will talk about later. But Bill Clinton, as he emerged as a front-running candidate for the presidency, Clinton also found other troubling things on the American landscape. The country had been divided by conservative Republicans who demonized Democratic candidates. He had found racial divisions so fresh that people could not talk about them. He found a media now with 24 hours a day to talk about politics, investigating the private lives of politicians. So in January of 1992, as he's facing the New Hampshire primaries, scandal erupts when a tabloid journal discussed in graphic detail at times an affair he allegedly had with Jennifer Flowers, a lounge singer from Little Rock, Arkansas. Stories abounded with Clinton's alleged womanizing, many of it found later to be true. People found that he had dodged the draft during the Vietnam War. People had found that he had used political connections to dodge the draft by getting draft deferments, by getting into law school at Arkansas before he pursued his degree at Yale, promising others still that he would join ROTC, as well as his alleged drug use during the 1960s. Now, not much of this had anything really to do with the substantive job of being president of the United States. But compared to the aristocratic, New England-bred George H.W. Bush, it gave Americans quite a choice. Who were they going to pick? This young 40-something-year-old man with no experience in one of America's smallest states, or would they pick and retain an aristocratic man who seemed so divorced from the average lives of average people. The election of 1992 was a contrast between this new figure in Bill Clinton, who promised a new way, who understood the concerns of working people, who talked about helping people through universal health care, tax credits, job training, educational opportunities, etc. And President Bush, who wanted to limit government. But at the same time that President Bush was trying to navigate the tricky waters of a presidential election, he's having to face problems on his own side, such as conservatives who were greatly angered by his refusal to uphold his pledge from 4 years before, in which he promised to raise no taxes. People like Pat Buchanan, arch conservatives whose long history in the conservative movement go all the way back to the 1950s, and in Buchanan's case served in the Nixon administration, had been to push him to the right. No more taxes, to cut taxes, to bring family values and morality back into American life. The 1960s and the secularism that came out of it seemed to be an evil affront to the instincts of these people. They pushed Bush to the right, and in doing so, they helped to weaken him for the general election. It also demonstrated that there was a real concern in American life about the direction of the country. That after 12 years of Republican rule, in which deficits skyrocketed, in which millions lost homes, health care, educational opportunities, as more and more people went to prison for petty crimes, including petty drug crimes, Americans were worried. And Bill Clinton was able to seize upon that in order to defeat him in November 1992. As Bill Clinton took advantage of the economic recession, of all these problems that I have mentioned, he also turned away from the Bush and Reagan policies. He began to institute his own policies and demonstrated through that a passion for free trade. The signature achievement of President Clinton's administration in terms of economics had been the passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, opening up the borders here in the United States and across North America to free trade. This was a major policy initiative, a belief that had gone back to Bush and Reagan, that in this new world there needed to be greater involvement in the world, and the breakdown of the old protectionist barriers, as they saw them, between economic trade between countries. Moreover, Clinton also began a new policy initiative which would help Americans, he believed, on the domestic front. For instance, he brought about a plan, as promised, to provide for universal health care for the increasing number of Americans who lacked health insurance. He had promised to take a serious look at controlling healthcare costs, as well as expanding coverage in much the same way that the Medicare program had 30 years before. This universal healthcare coverage, everybody would get a card. He even put First Lady of the United States, Hillary Rodham Clinton, in position to chair a critical task force that would look at healthcare and how to use healthcare and how to make it affordable and make sure that everybody was covered. This was obviously attacked by conservatives and others who saw this as a major power grab. Hillary Clinton and the president did no favors for themselves when they excluded Republicans and they excluded others and ran a very secretive operation in which only a few key people in the White House and their aides knew anything at all about what was taking place with the plan. It was attacked by doctors, health insurance companies, and drug companies, using much of the same language that had been used during the Roosevelt era in the 30s and the Truman era in the 40s, as well as the Johnson era in the 60s, calling it socialized medicine, producing ads such as the Harry Louise ads, talking about the incredible complexity of the proposed law. Even many Democrats could not support the president's plan, and it died in a horrible political defeat for the president. Beyond just the healthcare agenda, those first 2 years of the Clinton presidency didn't seem to accomplish much, but they were very important and set the stage, if you will, for the coming prosperity of the mid and late 1990s. Clinton decided to abolish restrictions on medical research, to improve upon women's right to choose, to protect abortion rights against those who were opposed. Moreover, he helped states take the first steps towards welfare reform. Welfare had been a wedge issue in American politics going back all the way to the beginning of the Social Security Act in 1935. Reagan had been incredibly successful by labeling women, particularly black women, as welfare queens, those who are just using on the public dole, just using the public and not giving anything back. In fact, the welfare queen was based on a story from Reagan during the 1980 election when she attacked a woman who lived in Chicago, a woman who allegedly was collecting hundreds of checks and driving a Cadillac. Truth of the matter was she was only receiving a couple checks, and that was still bad enough. But it played upon the racial and gender fears of millions of Americans and their resentments. And Clinton was sympathetic to the cause that people should help themselves. This is where he took a Republican ideal and used that in order to effect policy change. In February of 1993, the Family and Medical Leave Act. We often take for granted the fact that workers can take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to care for sick ones, new babies, and others in their family. But the Family and Medical Leave Act has been important in transforming America's commitment to its families. Vice President Al Gore, a former senator from the state of Tennessee, had also been heavily involved in many of these issues during the Clinton presidency and took initiative in what he called reinventing government, streamlining government, making it more successful, more efficient for the American public, and bringing in, along with all the other new Democrats, this idea of market-based reform. Clinton's strategy was to deal with critical issues in the beginning, but as he was beaten up by his political opponents, he saw his popularity sink as the nation turned into 1994 and into the fall of 1994. The triangulation, as he called it, and as his advisor Dick Morris called it, was not good. The American public was not seeing change fast enough. The expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit, of a deficit-reducing bill, and others had not gone far enough yet. People weren't feeling the effects of the Clinton economic policies, and therefore that combined with these cultural issues that he was allegedly a pot-smoking, draft-dodging adulterer were becoming a real drag on his presidency. In the fall of 1994, led by Congressman Newt Gingrich of Georgia, the Republicans captured both houses of Congress for the first time since the 1950s. Using Clinton's unpopularity, the huge defeat of the health care bill, as well as the Clinton passage of the anti-crime bill of 1994, in which contained an assault weapons portion, Republicans were able to easily defeat many, many Democrats, including the Speaker of the House, Tom Foley of Washington State. As Clinton entered 1995, his presidency was at the nadir. It appeared that the president was doomed to be a one-term president. But as 1995 moved on, and Clinton continued pursuing policy changes such as welfare reform, and now attacking Republicans actively, especially when Newt Gingrich was caught complaining about his seat on Air Force One during a trip to Israel. The tide changed. President Clinton was able to take advantage of the mistakes and errors in political judgment of the Republican Party. As newcomers came in, these were newcomers who were extreme anti-government zealots in many cases. pro-gun advocates, anti-abortion advocates, people who were not just anti-government in the abstract, but anti-government in the personal. People who have been a part of the conservative movement, whether they be in Congress or they be in the Senate or in the state houses. And they made easy targets for a centrist administration in which the American public was largely opposed to one side or the other, but wanted to simply get things done through a middle way, which was what Clinton was trying to do. Like most presidents when they receive defeats at home or struggled domestically, Clinton also went abroad and began dealing with world affairs, not just because he was interested in it, but because he needed to. Some of these led to great achievements, others led to great failures. The 1993 invasion of Somalia, in which several U.S. Armed Force personnel were killed, was a stinging indictment, as many saw it, for the Clinton years. Maybe he was too inexperienced. Perhaps his lack of military service was hurting his judgment. Even the military had squabbled, sometimes in public settings, about the new commander-in-chief. Clinton encountered a world that was vastly different from the ones his predecessors had encountered. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union no longer existed. Moreover, international conflicts, some of them long-standing, had come to the forefront. The issue of genocide, human rights, were ever present. Many of the conflicts that had been left simmering since World War I, such as the Balkans, now had to be dealt with during the Clinton administration. In places like Sarajevo, Kosovo, Serbia, and other areas, ethnic tensions between Muslims and others exploded. In places like Africa and Rwanda, hundreds of thousands died before the bloodshed stopped. The push for human rights began to take a central place in international relations. Clinton also pursued, like his predecessors, some type of meaningful peace in the Middle East, and was able to secure, in that first 2 years, the Oslo Agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. He found it difficult, like all of his predecessors, to balance concern for human rights with strategic and economic interest. This is not unusual, and it's a hard thing for most American presidents to deal with. How do we deal with this issue of balancing our needs with our higher ideals of human rights and protecting the sanctity of human life? The complexity of these foreign policy crises only added to the challenges, don't you see, that Clinton faced in that first administration, not least of which included the disintegration of Yugoslavia. Human rights emerged as a justification, don't you see, for interventions anywhere in the world, and anywhere, I should say, at any time in the past would have been considered an internal matter of sovereign nations.